The Thaleri throne hall was a cathedral of light and silence. Its towering spires arched into shadow. The crystalline walls shimmered with living bioluminescence that pulsed faintly like the heartbeat of the empire itself. 1,000 nobles, warriors, and courtiers stood in their jeweled regalia. Waiting for a moment that would shape their future, it was the night of the selection. Once every cycle, the empire's most eligible stepped forward to claim the hand of the royal heir. It was a moment of pride, of ambition. Marrying the princess meant not only a lifetime of status, but also a share in the governance of one of the galaxy's most powerful dynasties. Ambitious families sharpened their smiles and adjusted their cloaks, hoping to secure a place at the princess's side. And yet, as the ritual unfolded, one thing became clear. None dared to choose her. Princess Solari sat upon the throne, radiant and still, her golden eyes sharp enough to cut through the thick layers of formality. Her presence was not demure, not soft like the consort's courtiers were accustomed to. She had been educated in diplomacy, trained in combat, and raised with the expectation of command. Every story whispered about her reinforced the same idea. Solari was no one's ornament. A merchant noble stepped forward, his silks rustling. He bowed deeply, eyes fixed on the floor, but when he lifted his head, his words faltered. Solari's gaze, calm and unblinking, locked with his. For a heartbeat, the hall held its breath. Then, as if burned, the noble stammered a few excuses and withdrew. A warrior followed, armored in silver. He moved boldly, speaking of honor and legacy. But when Solari leaned forward slightly and asked him to define honor, his words tangled into silence. His retreat was quieter, but no less humiliating, so it went, one after another. Warriors, diplomats, sons of governors, even alien envoys who had wrangled invitations to the ceremony all faltered under the steady weight of her eyes. Some muttered apologies, others laughed nervously, and some simply turned away before speaking at all. Fear, that was the truth of it. They feared her mind, sharp enough to see through their ambitions. They feared her will, unyielding where others expected compliance. They feared her refusal to be shaped into a tool. To bind themselves to her was to risk being consumed, overshadowed, or outright defied, and so the hall that should have been filled with proud declarations became a chamber of silence. At the very back of the gathering, unnoticed among the glittering splendor, stood a human. Marcus Hale had not come as a suitor. He was no warrior of legend, no wealthy noble. He was an envoy, one of Earth's representatives in the Thaleri court, present only because human custom demanded diplomatic respect at events of such magnitude. His suit was plain, unadorned, and hopelessly ordinary beside the gleaming armors and flowing robes of the others. To him, the selection was nothing more than a formality to witness. He was there to observe, to report back, and to leave. Nothing more, but Solari's eyes swept across the hall, and everything changed. Her gaze paused, then fixed in him. Marcus stiffened as the weight of her attention pinned him in place. There was no mistaking it. Out of all the warriors and nobles, she was staring at the lone human envoy. His throat tightened. He told himself it was impossible, that she was only glancing his way. But no, her gaze did not move. The silence of the hall thickened, pressing like a storm about to break. Solari rose slowly from the throne, her movements deliberate, her presence commanding. The murmur of the crowd dimmed to nothing. She let the silence stretch, savoring it like a predator before the strike. "No one chooses me?" she asked at last. Her voice rang out clear and cold, carrying across the hall with steel hidden in silk. It was not a question for Marcus, it was a condemnation for them all. Gasps and shifting robes filled the chamber. No one answered. No one dared. Then, with a grace that felt both regal and dangerous, the princess descended the steps of the dais. Every step echoed against the crystal floor as she crossed the chamber. Ignoring the gasps of her people, the chamber was not built for silence. The Thaleri throne hall was a place of declarations, of orations, of voices raised in triumph or condemnation. But when Princess Solari's words struck the air wind, She turned to a lone human and asked him to be her husband. The silence was almost violent. For several heartbeats, no one dared to move. The nobles froze in their jeweled robes. Warriors tightened their grips on ceremonial weapons, and attendants stared with wide eyes, as if unable to comprehend what had just happened. Then the eruption came. Shouts overlapped one another in a storm of outrage. A human. She insults the crown. This is mockery. A disgrace. He cannot stand among us. He is dust and weakness. The High Chancellor, a towering figure in black and silver regalia, rose from his elevated seat, his ridged crest flaring in fury. He slammed the base of his staff against the crystal floor, the sound cracking through the uproar like thunder. Enough. He roared, and the voices fell away, though not the fury burning in their eyes. Solari did not flinch beneath the storm. Her golden eyes, sharp as a blade drawn in defiance, swept across the court with measured calm. "You would not claim me," she said, her tone unyielding, cutting through the charged air. "Not one of you had the courage. So I claimed for myself. Is that not my right as heir?" The Chancellor snarled, his gaze sliding from Solari to Marcus. "Your Highness, tradition demands worthiness." And he pointed the staff at Marcus like a weapon, is no more than a fragile outsider. A human. To place him beside our bloodline is to dishonor generations of rule. Marcus felt every eye in the chamber shift to him. He had not moved since Solari's choice, his body locked between disbelief and something more primal, fear. He had never been meant to be part of this. He was an envoy, a diplomat, an observer. He was supposed to smile politely, report back to Earth, and keep himself far away from galactic intrigue. And yet here he was, standing at the center of it all. Solari turned her gaze to him, her expression unreadable but commanding. Her words had been soft, almost intimate. When she asked her question, but her eyes now demanded an answer, Marcus's mouth went dry. Every instinct screamed at him to step back, to refuse, to save himself from the avalanche of political and cultural consequences about to bury him. If he declined, perhaps they would laugh, dismiss the whole event as a cruel joke by the princess. He could walk away alive, turn to Earth unscarred. But there was something in the way she looked at him, defiant, unafraid, almost daring him to be different from the rest. She had placed him in this moment, whether by strategy, desperation, or a spark of something neither of them yet understood. He inhaled slowly, steadying his voice. His words caught, and the court leaned forward as one, expecting refusal. They wanted to see him break, to confirm their beliefs about human weakness. But instead, something flickered within him. Pride, defiance, a recognition that humans, for all their fragility, had never been defined by silence. His people had survived worse odds, stared down greater powers, and endured. He lifted his chin. "I accept." The words were quiet, but they struck the chamber like a shockwave. Nobles erupted in furious exclamations. Some hissed, as if his presence was poison. Warriors shouted their disbelief, their voices echoing against the vaulted ceiling. Even the Chancellor's face darkened, his fury twisting into near contempt. "This is blasphemy," he thundered. "The blood of the throne must not be polluted with alien weakness. He will bring ruin." Marcus swallowed hard, his pulse racing, but forced himself to step forward, just enough to show he would not cower. "Maybe I am weaker than you," he admitted, his voice firming as he spoke. "Maybe I don't have your strength, or your titles, or your traditions. But I wasn't afraid to stand beside her when none of you would." The words cut deeper than any blade. Murmurs rippled across the court, some voices angry, others uncertain. For the first time, doubt seeped into their outrage. Solari smiled faintly, the kind of smile that hid both satisfaction and warning. She placed herself at his side, her presence radiating authority. "You call him fragile, yet he stood when you faltered. You call him unworthy, yet he dared when you cowered. Tell me, counsel, what greater proof of worth is there?" The Chancellor's knuckles whitened against his staff. "If he claims strength, then let him prove it. Let the trials of worth decide if this human deserves the honor he presumes." Solari's gaze never wavered, and neither did Marcus's, though his stomach dropped at the words. He did not know what the trials were, only that the entire court seemed to hold its breath at the declaration. "Very well," Solari said, her voice like steel wrapped in velvet. "He will face your trials. And when he endures, remember this dare member who dared." And who trembled? The court bristled. But none dared defy her directly. Marcus's fate was sealed. He had accepted on now he would have to survive. The announcement of the trials hung in the air like a death sentence. Marcus had never heard of them before that moment, but the reaction of the court told him enough. Gasps, murmurs, some faces breaking into cruel smiles. These were no symbolic tests. They were ordeals meant to crush even the strongest of Thaleri warriors. And he, human diplomat with no weapon training beyond basic self-defense courses, had just been volunteered. Solari did not flinch. She inclined her head ever so slightly, her golden eyes fixed on the Chancellor. So be it. Let him face the trials. That night, Marcus was not given rest. Palace attendants escorted him to the preparation chambers, though preparation seemed a cruel joke. No strategy, no details, no special equipment, only a plain tunic, a flask of water, and the faint, silent looks of pity from those who believed they were escorting him to his end. Solari met him at the entrance of the first chamber. Unlike the others, her face betrayed no pity, no doubt. Instead, there was something steadier, like a promise hidden behind her sharp composure. "Do not try to fight as they do," she told him softly, so only he could hear. "Fight as a human. That is what they fear most." Marcus wanted to ask what she meant, but there was no time. The first trial began. The trial of strength, a circular arena lit by pulsing crystal torches, greeted him. At its center stood a Thaleri guard in gleaming armor, wielding twin plasma blades that hissed and crackled with lethal energy. The crowd of nobles filled the balconies above, their cheers laced with cruelty. Marcus was handed a staff plain wood, nothing more. The duel began with a flash of light. The guard moved with inhuman speed, blades slicing arcs of fire through the air. Marcus barely dodged the first strike, the heat searing across his face. He couldn't match the guard in power. Every swing threatened to break his bones if he blocked it head-on. So he did what humans had always done when outmatched. He adapted. He ducked low, scrambled, rolled across the arena floor, turning his staff into leverage rather than a weapon. When the guard lunged, Marcus tripped him with a sudden kick and shoved him into the wall. When the blades flashed again, Marcus used debris, dust, even his own jacket to distract, block, and survive. Minutes stretched into eternity. Each dodge was slower, each breath sharper, but he endured. And at the moment when the guard overextended, Marcus swung his broken staff in a desperate arc, striking the plasma hilt and knocking, one blade spinning across the floor. The crowd fell silent. The human had not won outright, but he had not lost. Against a trained warrior with nothing but instinct and stubbornness, he had survived. The trial of endurance, there was no rest. Marcus was dragged from the arena and cast into the fire wastes, an expanse of blistering canyons beneath an unrelenting sun. The air shimmered with heat, the ground cracked beneath his boots. Even the Thaleri rarely braved this place, its dry winds scalding the lungs. No weapons. No shade, no food. He staggered forward, each step an act of will. Memories surfaced, images of Earth's deserts, of explorers who crossed endless sands with nothing but determination. Humanity had never been built on ease. They were forged in hunger, in thirst, in struggle. Marcus rationed his water carefully, moving by the shadows of cliffs where he could. He wrapped cloth around his face to shield against the burning winds. Every hour pressed him closer to collapse. Yet he remembered Solari's words, "Fight as a human." So he did what humans had always done. He endured. When he finally stumbled out of the canyon days later, lips cracked, skin blistered, but alive. Even the most cynical nobles stared in disbelief. The trial of spirit. The final test was the cruelest. He was led into the circle of shadows. A chamber lined with black crystal that pulsed faintly, feeding on thought. The moment he entered, Illusions twisted around him. He saw earth in flames, cities reduced to ash. He saw his family calling out, vanishing into smoke. He saw Solari chained and broken, her eyes accusing him of failure. His knees buckled. The weight of fear pressed harder than any desert sun. But Marcus remembered these were lies. Shadows given shape. He forced himself upright, fists clenched, breath steady. "You're not real," he muttered through gritted teeth, each word dragging him further from despair. "You're not real. I've faced fear before. I won't bow to it now." The illusion shrieked and cracked. Darkness peeled away like shattered glass. When he emerged, he was pale, trembling, and drenched in sweat, but unbroken. The court awaited him in the grand hall once more. Marcus stood scarred, weary and bruised. Yet he was alive. He had endured what none expected him to survive. The nobles who once scoffed now whispered, unease creeping into their voices. Solari stepped forward, her golden eyes alight, her smile sharp as a blade. She stood beside him, her hand brushing his just enough for the court to see. "Do you see now?" she said coldly. "He is not weak. He is human, and for the first time, silence held, not scorn. But something closer to fear. The trials should have killed him." That was the truth unspoken by every noble who had watched. The arenas, the fire wastes, the circle of shadows all were designed to strip a warrior down to nothing and leave only strength or death behind. Yet Marcus, Al, had survived. Not as a Thalari warrior would have, by brute force, by inherited power, but by something else entirely. By wit, by stubbornness. By an unyielding refusal to give in even when his body screamed for rest. The court had no choice but to acknowledge it. The law was clear. He had endured, and thus he had earned. But acknowledgement was not acceptance, even as the whispers of his resilience spread through the empire. Marcus could feel the eyes of the court upon him, full of suspicion and thinly veiled disdain. To them, he was an aberration, an inconvenience, forced upon tradition. They expected him to falter now that the spectacle was over, to reveal himself as the fragile outsider they had always believed him to be. Marcus, however, was less concerned with their whispers than with the single question that gnawed at him. Why him? It was in the quiet of Solari's private chambers, away from the noise and venom of the court, that he finally gave voice to it. She had dismissed her attendants, leaving only the two of them amidst the faint glow of crystalline lanterns. The walls here were different from the grand halls, less imposing, more personal. Bookshelves lined with ancient texts, maps scrawled with roots and notes, small tokens from far worlds she had visited. She was not the untouchable heir here. She was simply Solari. Marcus sat heavily on a low stone bench, his body still aching from burns and bruises. He watched her move with deliberate grace, removing the ceremonial jewelry she had worn before the court. For the first time since meeting her, he saw the faint traces of exhaustion in her posture. "Why me?" he asked at last, his voice quiet but weighted. "You could have chosen anyone. A general. A noble. Someone from your own people. Instead, you looked at me, a stranger, a human." "Why?" Solari paused, her golden eyes lingering on him. For a long time she said nothing. The silence stretched, filled only by the faint hum of the chamber's walls. At last she spoke. "Because no one else dared." Marcus frowned. "Dared what?" "To see me?" Her words were soft, but they struck with the same precision as her public declarations. "They look at me and see a throne, a crown, a bloodline. To them, I am not a woman, not a person only power to be taken, bent, used. You." Her gaze softened, just slightly. "You looked at me and saw someone standing alone." Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "I didn't." "Yes, you did." Her tone was firm, cutting off his protest. "When all others averted their eyes, you met mine. When I asked, you could have refused. The weight of tradition, of politics, of tyranny, of these would have excused you. But you didn't. You said yes." He exhaled, leaning forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "I didn't say yes because I wasn't afraid. I was terrified. I said yes because somehow I believed you. Believed there was a reason you asked me. Believed you needed me, even if I didn't understand why. Her lips curved not into the sharp smile she wielded before the court, but something gentler, something rare. A true smile. Then perhaps we both believed, she said softly. The air shifted between them. The walls of politics and tradition still loomed outside. But here in this quiet chamber, there was no crown, no court, no empire. Only two people, alien princess and a human envoy bound together by a choice that neither could fully explain. Yet neither wished to undo. Marcus reached for his flask of water, his hands trembling from fatigue. Without a word, Solari took it from him, unstoppered it, and offered it back. The gesture was small, but it carried weight. A queen waiting, serving the man who had stood beside her. "Do you regret it?" Marcus asked suddenly. "Choosing me?" Solari's eyes met his, unwavering. "No, the court thinks you are weak. They see your scars, your exhaustion, and think it is proof of fragility. They do not understand. Scars are proof of survival. Exhaustion is proof of endurance. You have already taught them something they did not wish to learn. And what's that? That humanity cannot be ignored." The words settled over him like a mantle. Heavy, daunting, yet strangely fitting. He had not come to this world to make history. But now, standing at Solari's side, he could not escape it. In that moment, Marcus realized something else. Their bond was not just a political act, not just defiance against tradition. It was the forging of something stronger. Respect, trust, perhaps even love, though it was still too new, too fragile to name. For the Fur, the announcement of their union spread across the empire like wildfire, carried on the wings of rumor before the official decree was even written. Some laughed outright, mocking the Thaleri princess who had lowered herself to choose a fragile outsider. Others whispered in disgust, calling it a stain on the throne. Yet a few more perceptive than the rest watched with unease, because the human had survived. And survival against all odds was a kind of power the galaxy respected, even if begrudgingly. When the proclamation was read aloud in the throne hall, Marcus stood at Solari's side, his posture stiff but steady. The nobles filled the chamber again, though this time their faces wore masks of restraint. The law was clear. He had passed the trials. He had earned his place. To protest openly now would not only be futile, but dangerous. Still, Marcus could feel the weight of their scorn pressing against him like a physical force. Every step he took was measured against centuries of tradition he had broken simply by existing at Solari's side. And yet, she stood with him. Not as a shield, but as a partner. Her presence was an unspoken declaration. This is my choice. My will. My future. Whispers of change beyond the court. The empire buzzed with speculation. Markets. Garrisons. Academies everywhere people debated the meaning of it. Why him? Humans are nothing. Perhaps he has some hidden strength. Or perhaps he has. Already bewitched her. The galaxy at large was no kinder. Other empires ridiculed the Thaleria for letting their bloodline mingle with a backwater species. Yet, beneath the laughter, unease grew. For humans had long been underestimated, dismissed as young, scattered, insignificant. Now one of their own stood poised to influence an empire older than Earth's written history. And unlike the others, Solari had not chosen out of desperation. She had chosen out of defiance. The humans influenced Marcus, had expected to be ornamental, a pawn at Solari's side. But she had no intention of letting him fade into the background. She sought his counsel in council meetings, where his perspective often clashed with the rigid thinking of the nobles. Where they saw only the weight of tradition, Marcus offered practicality. Where they demanded displays of dominance, Marcus suggested diplomacy, trade, or subtle strategy. At first the nobles scoffed, but slowly, grudgingly, they began to see results. A border dispute cooled not because of intimidation, but because Marcus proposed an exchange of resources that benefited both sides. A rebellious outpost was pacified not with soldiers, but with infrastructure projects that eased the lives of its people. It was not strength as the Thaleri defined it, but it was effective, and Solari knew that effectiveness was a weapon more powerful than any plasma blade. The growing bond behind the closed doors of the palace, their partnership deepened. Marcus learned the subtleties of Thaleri culture, the layers of meaning in their gestures, the weight of their ancient songs. Solari, in turn, pressed him for stories of earth, of deserts and mountains, of wars survived, of art and laughter that bloomed even in hardship. In their conversations, a rhythm grew. Respect became trust. Trust became something more. Marcus no longer questioned why she had chosen him. Instead, he began to ask how he could rise to meet the enormity of that choice. Solari, for her part, no longer saw him as an experiment or a gamble. She saw him as an anchor, a steady presence in a storm of politics and power. What began as defiance was becoming destiny. The queen ascends when the day came for Solari to ascend the throne. The hall was filled beyond capacity. Nobles, warriors, emissaries from distant Empire Zal had come to witness history. Solari walked the length of the hall in ceremonial armor, her bearing regal, unbreakable. Marcus walked beside her, not behind. Murmurs rippled through the assembly at the sight. Never before had a consort been granted equal footing in such a procession. At the dais, the crown of living crystal was placed upon her brow, pulsing faintly as it bonded with her presence. She turned then, not to bask in her power alone, but to extend her hand. Marcus took it without hesitation, and together they faced the galaxy. In that moment, the message was clear. She was queen, and he was no mere ornament. He was her chosen, her partner. Her proof that strength came not only from bloodlines, but from will. A new legacy the galaxy watched in silence. Some sneered, others whispered, but none could ignore what had unfolded. The Thaleri Empire had not weakened by her choice. It had changed. And change was something empires feared most of all from that day forward. The name Marcus Hale was spoken in the same breath as Solari's, not as a shadow, not as an afterthought, but as part of a legacy being written in real time, and the galaxy, for the first time, began to understand a truth that humans had always known deep in their bones. Greatness is not given. Greatness is chosen. When no one chose her, a human had. And together, they would reshape destiny itself.